Hi friends! We have another change of scenery this week. I wanted to include the Christmas tree in at least one of my videos, and I figured what better video than the video. I think that this is the video that everybody waits for at the end of the year, and that is the best books that I read in 2024. So this is kind of the wrap up to end all wrap ups. Last week I did speed reviews of all of my non 5-star reads, and today we're talking about the best of the best. I feel like I have become a lot more discerning this year with the 5-star ratings that I give out, which I'm kind of happy about. I think in previous years when I was just getting back into reading, I was so excited about everything that I picked up, and I gave out a lot of 5 stars to some books that at this time I would probably not consider to be 5 stars. No shade to any of those books, but yeah, I feel like I've kind of gotten my rating system in check a little bit more. So yeah, I think that about covers it. I've got 14 books that I want to talk about, but before we get into those, I did just want to kind of give an honorable mention to 3 rereads that I did this year that were also 5-star reads. I have entire vlogs dedicated to these books, so I'm not gonna get too deep into them here. I just want to mention them, and then if you want to watch the vlog and listen to me talk about the book, feel free to do so. Those 5-star rereads were Too Much and Not the Mood by Durga Bose. This is an essay collection, and it is probably my favorite essay collection of all time. It is full of just like really personal writing, really beautiful prose, and I highly recommend it to everybody. It is one of the few books that I feel like anybody could pick up and have a good time with. I also reread Sula by Toni Morrison this year. You don't need me to tell you that Toni Morrison is an incredible writer. This is a novel about 2 girls, Nell and Sula, and their friendship and them growing apart and then coming back together. It's full of some very harrowing scenes that have been etched into my brain since the first time that I read it in 2022. And yeah, I mean, Toni Morrison is just the best. You can't go wrong with her. And then we also have Crying in Mart by Michelle Zauner, and this is a memoir from the lead singer of the band Japanese Breakfast. She is dealing with her mother's grief in this book.
Guys, I meant to say grief from her mother's death, not her mother's grief.
Made me cry my eyes out. Also made me really hungry because there's a lot of food writing talking about traditional Korean dishes in here, and yeah, I just think that it is genuinely such a well-written, moving memoir. Okay, now that the rereads are out of the way, let's really just get into it. I'm gonna go in chronological order. I'm not gonna like rank these in any sort of way. It's just gonna be the 14 5-star reads that I had. And the first one I actually don't have a copy of, and that is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I borrowed this from my friend Claire, and I have yet to get my hands on a copy of it. I read this back in January, and the review that I wrote was super short for it. I don't know what was going on there, so I'm gonna try and do my best to give you some thoughts here, but I remember that I flew through this book. I read the second half of it in one night. I was on my couch. It was a cold day outside, and I was like, we're just getting into it. The book follows our narrator. I believe her name is Casey. She is kind of floating through life. She is also dealing with some grief for the death of her mother, and trying to get off the ground as an aspiring writer. And she has some relationships, she's kind of working some dead-end jobs, you know, just trying to get through life. And I found that this book just really tugged on my heartstrings. There were a lot of really tender but simple moments between the characters. And the narrator, Casey, is just one of those characters that you're just rooting for the entire time. I think a lot of the times with literary fiction, you don't always get that. Like, there's a lot of unlikable narrators, or, you know, we're more focused on like the writing and the ideas than the characters themselves. But I thought that Casey was so lovable, so that was a fun change of pace. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this. It is one of those books, kind of like Too Much and Not the Mood, where I would consider it to be like a comfort read. I think it's great for this time of year to just like curl up with and get lost in the lives of these characters. Next, we have a book that I did not rate 5 stars initially, but whenever I was going through and making my notes for this video, I said, you know what? I actually need to bump this up to 5 stars because it has had such an impact on me. I still think about this book every day, and that is Liars by Sarah Manguso. Thank you so much to Hogarth for the arc of it. I think I had initially rated this 4 or 4.5 stars, but like I said, I truly think about this book so often, and I read it back in like February, and it has had so much sticking power. It's a really tough book to talk about. It deals with marriage and motherhood, like many of the books that I enjoy reading, but it discusses trying to be a competent parent and maintain your domestic life while you're in the middle of a failing marriage. There's a lot of gaslighting and emotional abuse that goes on in the central relationship here, and it is just absolutely wild to read about. It's a tough read, and it's not because it's poorly written or anything like that. Quite the opposite, actually. It's just that the content is so like, it just hits you over the head with how terrible this relationship is. The relationship gets off to a really rocky start. There's some just like fishy things going on, and then from there the book is really just like this account of all of the wrongdoings of the man John in here. John and Jane are the couple. Their dynamic is just so messy and fraught, and Manguso renders it all in this very straightforward and sharp prose, and it really just allows for the like pure emotions to shine through. I genuinely had a visceral reaction to some of the situations in this book, and I actually like listened to a talk between Sarah Manguso and Sheila Heti. They were discussing this book, and Sarah was talking about how it is meant to be like this documentation of all of these little things that add up over a course of a relationship until it kind of comes to the boiling point. Jane, the wife in this book, is dragged from city to city. She can't put down roots anywhere. She doesn't have a good support system because she is always just going along with what her husband wants to do. He has these business ventures that end up failing the majority of the time. He's hopping from job to job, saying like, okay, like this next opportunity is gonna be the one. Like we're gonna settle down and we're gonna make it big. And that never happens. Meanwhile, Jane is like a successful writer, and John is like actively showing contempt for the success that she's found in her career. He also does not pull his weight in caring for their home or their child. And yeah, it's just really heavy, heavy stuff. But the prose, like I said, super sparse, super cutting, and it just propels you through the book. There are these like small brief glimpses of laughter and happiness in the relationship where Jane is like, oh, like maybe it's actually not so bad. I'm actually really glad that John is my husband. And I think that that kind of ties into the title of the book being Liars. I think Manguso is really exploring the ways that we lie to ourselves within relationships, and we're like, oh yeah, like this is all fine. And it's like, girl, no, it's not. The reason why I did not give this 5 stars when I initially read it was because I had some issues with the pacing. Looking back, I don't think that that is as big of a deal as I thought it was. There were just some points in time where I couldn't really tell how much time was passing in between events. And then suddenly it was like a wedding anniversary or someone's birthday. And I'm like, oh, like that much time has gone by? So that was just a little bit disorienting to me. But looking back, I don't think that it detracts from the overall experience of the book. I would say if you are a fan of books like A Frozen Woman by Annie Ernaux, My Work by Olga Ravin, A Life's Work by Rachel Cusk, The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginsburg. Geez, I really went off with my list of like books that this is similar to. First Love by Gwendolyn Riley, Drifts by Kate Zambrino. They all feel very in the same vein to me. So if that's your kind of thing, definitely check this out. It was released in July of this year, and Sarah Manguso is an author that is slowly but surely becoming an absolute favorite of mine. Next up, we have another book by the incredible Toni Morrison, and that is Beloved. I did something that I usually do not do, and that is I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a work day to finish this book before I had to go into the office. I am usually not entering consciousness until about 6:45-ish, sometimes 7 if I'm really pushing it. So the fact that I said, let me get up 45 minutes to an hour earlier than normal, I think that really says something about how invested I was in this book. Just like with Sula, there are a lot of really harrowing moments in this book. I mean, she is exploring the horrors of life under slavery in this book, and yeah, there's just some really gruesome parts to it. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was the way that Morrison builds up to the details. She revisits certain events a lot, and every time that she comes back to them, she'll kind of reveal a little bit more about what happened until you all of a sudden get the like full picture. I thought that it really propelled the book forward and really was in service of what she has to say about the way that we deal with memory and trauma. She really is asking the question of whether or not we can truly escape from our past. Even if we think that we've attained some sort of distance from it, whether that's like physically or just from the passing of time, it always kind of comes back to haunt you, especially with something as terrible and traumatic as life under slavery. The thing that I love about Morrison's writing so much is just how incredible she is at creating imagery and characters that stick with you. It was the same thing with Sula. There are scenes from that book that are etched into my brain. Same thing here. She also is really great at creating a distinct sense of time and place, and she gives her characters such distinct personalities and voices. So it's just so rich and evocative. This is one of those books that I think I would 100,000% benefit from a reread of it. I'm sure that there are a lot of things that I missed out on during my first read, but that just means that there's an opportunity in the future to come back to it and get even more out of it than I did the first time. So yeah, Toni Morrison writing her ass off in this book, as she always does. You don't need me to tell you that that's what's up with her. Next up is a memoir, and that is Splinters by Leslie Jamison. This book was also released this year, I think in like January or February. I was so excited for this book because I've read her previous essay collections and I really enjoyed those. There's also a little excerpt from this book. I'll leave the link to it down below so you guys can check it out if you're interested. If you enjoy that little snip, you should 100% pick up the entire book. This ticks all of the boxes of things that I love in a book. We've got marriage, mother-daughter relationships from both perspectives, which is kind of fun, kind of different. Writing and art, grappling with the self, starting over. It is such a perfect storm of elements that just speak to me personally. So Leslie is exploring the dissolution of her marriage to a fellow writer. She becomes a single parent to her daughter and is trying to balance that with her work. She is obviously a writer and a teacher. She goes on these book tours. She actually ends up taking her daughter along for some of those journeys, and I think that the excerpt that's kind of what it touches on. She was really lucky to have assistance from her mom on these trips, but it just is so mind-boggling the fact that she was able to juggle all of those things at the same time. She also talks a lot about her own parents' relationship in here. They got divorced as well, and then they kind of developed an unconventional friendship that is outside of the norm and really opposite of the situation that Leslie has with her ex-husband. Like, Leslie's mom officiated her dad's wedding after they split up and he remarried. So yeah, it was just so opposite from Leslie and her ex not being on speaking terms with each other. And then we also get to see a lot of Leslie's relationship with her mother. They became incredibly close after her parents split up. And I thought that it was really interesting because Leslie almost kind of projects that closeness that her and her mother had onto her own relationship with her daughter, where she kind of tries to like recreate that really close bond. And her mother is very present after her daughter is born as well. So there's kind of this like triptych of like grandmother, mother, daughter, and just this closeness that they had, and the way that Leslie's husband was kind of shut out of that triangle, if you will. I do think that for all of the, not so fun parts of getting divorced and everything, I think that Leslie was really fair to her husband in this book. I think that there's this sense of guilt about the hurt that she caused him, and she doesn't blame him for everything that went wrong in their relationship. She's kind of trying to balance out and like reconcile, okay, here's my share of the blame with here are the reasons why I need to get out of this relationship. But I don't think that she's like disparaging towards him in any way. I did see a review of this on Goodreads that was kind of frustrated with the end of the book where Leslie is kind of getting back on the dating scene and falling into some unhealthy patterns in these relationships. I think that that's kind of the beauty of memoir. That's just life for you. Nobody is perfect. We all kind of have certain habits and behaviors that we repeat until we learn our lesson. I get wanting to see growth and wanting to see people do better, but people trip up. You don't become a new person overnight. But I really appreciate that she kind of showed her effort to break out of those patterns. And yeah, I just thought that it was very honest. So like I said, I will leave the link to the little excerpt from the New Yorker down in the description box. If you haven't read this book and you're like, ooh, that might be interesting, read the excerpt. If you like the excerpt, read the book. Next is a book from the Queen, Rachel Cusk. We have Arlington Park. This is by far my favorite Cusk that I read this year, and I think I read like 5 of them. I find it really interesting with her books. If you haven't seen it, I have an entire video dedicated to Rachel Cusk's catalog. Like, I'm genuinely just yapping for an hour about all of her books and her new release parade. But what I find with her books is that I love her standalone novels so much more than the Outline trilogy, which is kind of like her bread and butter, her thing that she's known for at this point is that trilogy. And I've always just gotten along so much better with just her standalone novels. This is definitely my favorite of all of Cusk's novels, so there's that. I'm declaring it now. This book follows a group of women who are living in the suburbs of London, and it takes place over the course of a single day. The whole thing kind of culminates in a dinner party scene where all of the women and their husbands come together. So yeah, all of these women are wives and mothers, and they're all kind of struggling with their positions in life. If you're familiar with Aftermath by Rachel Cusk, which is her essays / memoir about her divorce, I think that a lot of the themes from that book pop up in Arlington Park as well. Same thing with A Life's Work, which talks about motherhood. This book feels like the perfect companion to those two pieces of nonfiction. This book, I think, it shows the struggles that these women are facing, which are very real and valid, but it does also critique the privilege that they have. They are all white, pretty wealthy women, and even though they're unhappy, they definitely have some status. Each of the characters in this book also has kind of a different level of empathy for people that are less fortunate with them. And Cusk kind of creates her critiques through the conversations that the characters have. They kind of clash because of their differing opinions sometimes, and I think that you can kind of see how Cusk is poking fun at a lot of the privilege that these characters have. The thing that really stood out to me in this book, though, was the imagery in here. It is so rich, and Cusk is just so good at setting the scene, painting the picture. There's a scene that takes place in a shopping mall, and it is so detailed and vivid. It feels like you are at the mall with Rachel Cusk. She also has a lot of descriptions about the messy bedrooms of the children in this book. You know, she goes toy by toy, mess by mess, and just, you can see what the rooms look like in your mind. She's so good at describing those things. I think it's a really great demonstration of how the world that these characters live in is so mundane, but also so excessive at the same time, because they have that class and that status. And yeah, I just felt like Cusk's writing in this book was less restrained. It is an earlier work of hers. She's kind of shifted her style as the years have gone on. The writing just felt almost playful in a way that it doesn't in her newer books. And I was just like delighted by that. I had so much fun with it. Next is Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. I think that Audre Lorde is one of my favorite authors that I've discovered this year. I'm currently reading the selected works of hers that Roxane Gay edited and put together, and the essays in there are so good. Like, I need to read everything that she has ever written. This is a very like genre defying book, and I think that it is so underrated. It is so detailed and so reflective, talking about Audre Lorde's childhood and young adulthood. I really had a difficult time reviewing this book because she covers so much. This book is so expansive. She talks about her identity as a Black lesbian coming of age in the 1950s here. And so we see there's a lot of intersectionality, the way that her sexuality and her race kind of combine and compound and create this feeling of isolation and loneliness for her, because she feels like she can't connect to a lot of her peers. She just displays so much strength and so much deep self-reflection in this book that I was just hanging on to her every word. I mean, I just reread an excerpt of this book that is in like her selected works, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's just so good. She writes about having to kind of navigate the world of female love, whether that's romantically, familially, is that a word? Platonically, you know, she talks about her mother, her sisters, her friends, her lovers. It's just so central to, I think, most of her writing. She also talks a lot about racism. She goes into her best friend's suicide, her own abortion that she had whenever she was young. Like, there's a lot of really harrowing subjects in here, so do be mindful of that. But just hearing how she kind of carved out a path for herself as a young woman and just like built her life from the ground up is so inspiring. If you enjoy memoirs or personal writing of any kind, you have to read this. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I think that it is like a crown jewel in the genre of memoir, autobiography, whatever you want to call it. I feel like I see a lot more people reading her like shorter nonfiction and essays, but I don't see many people talking about this, and like I need you guys to get on the train with this one. Next up, we have what is maybe the most mind-boggling book of the year for me. I duh, it really threw me for a loop, and that is My Death by Lisa Tuttle. I have a really long review here. This book is 105 pages, and I wrote paragraphs upon paragraphs about it. So there's something here. I also did something that I usually don't do, which is I read this book twice in 1 week. I finished it and I was like, what the heck just happened? And I reread it shortly after. And I enjoyed it just as much the second time around too. I feel like I got more out of it, and I don't know, it's just one of those books that you have to sit with for a very long time. I really liked Lisa Tuttle's writing style. It kind of hit this sweet spot in between like nice, well-written lit fic descriptions, but she also incorporates this feeling of dread and just like the uncanny in a way that I don't think that we get very often in literary fiction. She intertwines real literary figures with the lives of these fictional writers that are in this book. And like, I genuinely thought that this was a nonfiction book at certain points. I was like looking up the author that's at the center of it, and I was like, wait, is this a real woman? It's not, but I was convinced because she just weaves such a portrait of this life and the literary works that this fictional author created. I was genuinely disappointed that I couldn't read the book that they talk about here. In Troy is what it's called, by Helen Ralston. She's fake, the book isn't real. It was just made up for this, but it sounded so good from the way that Lisa Tuttle was talking about it. I was like, why is this not a real book? Lisa Tuttle, you should write it if you haven't yet. I feel like I'm being very vague about this because I think that it's a book that you need to just go into blind. I don't think that you should know what you're getting into here, but if you like books about art and writing that have kind of a twist to them, this is the one for you. I'm not going to go into the paragraphs of thoughts that I had on different like themes and motifs because that's just going to make this video way too long. If you want to hear about that, I will link the wrap up where I talk about this below because I yap about it for quite a while. Next is another book that I don't have a physical copy of because Scribner sent it to me on NetGalley, and that is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. This is right up there with Liars and Splinters, very similar in theme to it. I have a type, okay? Soldier Sailor is told from the perspective of a mother as she's like telling a bedtime story to her son. It is so visceral and propulsive, and it is really just this deep dive into both the horrors and the joys of new motherhood. Soldier is our narrator, and she's just kind of feeling unmoored, not really like herself. She doesn't receive a lot of support from her husband. He starts working longer and longer hours and leaves her to just kind of deal with the early days of motherhood all on her own. I actually have a quote from Arlington Park by Rachel Cusk in my review for this, which is funny. Like, I'm telling you, these books are all so in conversation with each other. I think that we're in such an era of like motherhood books. It's really great. But there's a quote in Arlington Park where she kind of talks about the small little acts in a relationship that build up and lead to resentment, which is also what Sarah Manguso is doing in Liars, you guys. It's all connected. I'm telling you, I'm like the meme from It's Always Sunny where he's got like the cork board with all the stuff. Everything's connected, okay? This quote that I've been circling around says, "They take a woman and little by little they murder her." And that's what's going on in all of these. There are some really intense scenes in this book, and it was another one that I just so viscerally reacted to. That was a weird way to structure that sentence, but okay. Claire Kilroy is not holding back with her honesty here, and I think that that could be kind of uncomfortable for some readers. I am not a mother myself, so I think maybe I'm a little bit less sensitive to that kind of thing. But I can totally see how that would be really affecting. But I just loved the raw emotions in here. The love that Soldier has for her son, Sailor, is very palpable, even though they face a lot of difficulties together. And those difficulties are rendered in this really beautiful, sometimes stream of consciousness prose, which is usually not something that I get along with super well, but it really worked here. I do have a quote from this book. It says, "What struck me as the starkest contradiction of all was that having navigated this much of life, the volatility of youth, of love and loss, the agony and the ecstasy, the closest I'd come to losing my mind was during the period known as settling down." I think that really just sums the whole thing up, you know? Mind focus. All right, next up, let's get back into some nonfiction with this adorable little edition of Exposure by Olivia Sudjic. This is the kind of nonfiction that I absolutely love, you guys, and it's so short and so little, like, it is perfect. I adore it. It is so referential and really reflective, and it's referential in a way that is so on par with my taste in books. I think that something that can really make or break nonfiction books for me is like if they're referencing an author or music or art or something that I'm not familiar with, I can sometimes kind of lose that connection to the book because I'm like, I don't fully know the source material that you're dissecting here. But this book, Olivia Sudjic, my girl. I'm just gonna give you the lineup because it's an all-star lineup of authors that she talks about here. We have Maggie Nelson, Chris Kraus, Rachel Cusk, Jenny Awful, Clarice Lispector, and Elena Ferrante. Like, I have books by all of those authors on my shelf. I haven't read any Maggie Nelson or Chris Kraus yet. I started Weather by Jenny Awful and then put it down, but like, hello, like that's such a good lineup of authors to be discussing. Anyways, this book is really just a synthesis of so many different ideas that are prominent. I already said that, we know. Olivia Sudjic uses these writers as a backdrop for her own struggles with primarily like the need to create an online identity and the way that we have to present ourselves, especially like authors and people in the publishing world have to kind of become these like figureheads online and market themselves in that way. And that was something that was very uncomfortable for her. She published a novel, Sympathy, which was on my 5-star list last year. She really struggled with anxiety after the book was published. And the way that she describes anxiety is very, very similar to the way that anxiety manifests for me personally. So I felt very seen about that. Like, we're experiencing anxiety about totally different things. I don't have the same, author problems as she does, but we definitely feel it in the same way. And she kind of shifts focus from her experience into the lives of the authors that I talked about earlier. She considers their works to be her like talismans. Is that how you say that? I don't know. She uses those as kind of her guiding light as she navigates the double standard that women writers face. The way that their fiction is kind of taken to be the absolute truth about their lived experiences. And then their nonfiction, people are like, oh, that's not true. Like, it's a very weird kind of thing that people put these authors through. One of the things that I really appreciated about this book was that it actually, like, as much as I am familiar with the subjects in here, it presented a challenge for me in the way that I think about my taste and my preference in writing. I'm someone that really tends to prefer very like personal, raw, memoiristic writing. And Olivia Sudjic really made me kind of question why that is my preference. And I kind of related this all back to Rachel Cusk, as I always do. Her newer work I've had kind of difficulties with. I've talked about this before. The style is very detached, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of struggled with the Outline trilogy, even with like Parade, her newest book. It's something that I've had to really work at to kind of like get into. Sudjic talks a lot about cusk in here and the way that the negative criticism of Rachel Cusk's earlier books kind of caused her to obscure herself in her more recent works. Olivia says about Cusk, she describes the reception to Aftermath as threatening her with total silence. I have lost all interest in having a self. Being a person has always meant getting blamed for it. And yeah, she's just like asking this question of how can writers balance this risk of like self-annihilation because they've exposed too much about themselves with, on the other hand, their need to create, their need to share their experiences and tell their story. And yeah, it just put a lot of things in perspective for me about Cusk. That's what I'm gonna say about that. It also just made me question, why do I as a reader feel such a strong pull to those really exposing narratives? Why is that the thing that I eat up? Why do I want to get these really like in-depth looks at people's lives? You know, it kind of made me do some self-reflection in that regard. I feel like I've said a lot about this. If you kind of also enjoy exploring those same kinds of questions about reading, or if you love any of the authors that she talks about in here, you really just cannot go wrong with this. You'll be able to finish it in an afternoon, and I just think that Olivia Sudjic is so underrated. I'm so excited to see what else she does. I have another quote here just to kind of close things out. It says, like most people, I read not only to encounter difference, but to find communion, to feel as if my inner life and the author's have briefly merged, to find skinlessness communicated on paper. Next up, we have a debut novel, and that is The Last Sane Woman by Hannah Regel. This is another one that I think is so underrated, guys. There's a theme here. This is one of those books that just totally works for me, and that was really groundbreaking whenever I wrote this review, because I think I was in kind of a slumpy territory at that point in time. But whenever I'm talking about it with all of the other books in this video, like, yeah, all of these books just work for me. I started this on a morning that I had off from work, and then after I got home from work that evening, there was a power outage, and I finished the entire thing that night. I read it on my e-reader because I received a galley of it from Verso, and then I literally pre-ordered the physical edition of it because I loved it so much. So yeah, it just really clicked with me. I think that if I fly through a book like that, that is a really good indicator that I absolutely loved it. This novel is looking at the lives of 3 different women. We have Nicola in the present day. She just completed her studies in art at university, and she's feeling a bit lost and directionless. We have Donna, who is a sculptor creating during the 1970s and 80s. She's kind of drifting from opportunity to opportunity, just going wherever the wind takes her. And then we have Donna's best friend, Susan, who is leading a more conventional life. She's got a house, a husband, a baby, and they all kind of come together when Nicola discovers letters that Donna wrote to Susan in a feminist art archive. She ends up becoming very obsessed with Donna and just so drawn to the similarities in their lives. I thought that the writing in this book was absolutely delicious. It's so rich and detailed, and Hannah Regel is a poet turned novelist, and you can tell in the best way possible. These sentences and the word choice, it's just all so yummy. She kind of flits in and out of different scenes from all 3 of these women's lives, and mixes those with excerpts of the letters that Donna was writing to Susan. And something about that combination of forms just really made this feel so compulsively readable to me. There is this web of background characters in all of the lives of the 3 women that made the reading experience very immersive. And yeah, she's just exploring female friendship, trying to find your purpose in life, whether or not you want to live a traditional domestic life or, a more creative, free-spirited kind of thing. And also the way that female artists are erased from history, which is really similar. I didn't really get into it with My Death by Lisa Tuttle, but I saw a lot of similarities between this book and that book. Literally the next paragraph in my review says, think of this as the contemporary counterpart to Lisa Tuttle's My Death. The one thing that is different is that this doesn't have the like metaphysical craziness that My Death has in it. But there is this kind of thread between both of them that just really draws on this idea of like finding an artist that you feel really connected to, where you feel like you are one and the same with that artist. Due to like the nature of the letters in the archive being that they're one-sided from Donna to Susan, there's a lot of gaps that Nicola isn't able to fill in, and she kind of projects herself into those gaps and sees herself as Donna. But us as readers, we get scenes from Donna and Susan's lives, so we get a bit more of like the full picture, and we have more information than Nicola does in the archive. So yeah, plays with form, explores ideas in a really engaging way, obsessed with the writing style. I am so excited to see what this author does in the future as far as novels go. Love it. Next up is a book that I'm not going to linger on for too long because it is the second book in a series, and that is The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. This is the second book in the Neapolitan Quartet. I think if you're in this corner of the internet with me, you know about these books. You've probably read them. Since this is the second one, I'm not gonna like give you all of the info here, but this was such a whirlwind. I enjoyed My Brilliant Friend whenever I read it last summer, but there was something missing there where I just didn't feel fully invested in the characters' lives. But this book changed everything for me. I was really hesitant to start this book. I waited like an entire year in between books 1 and 2 just because I was like, I don't know if I fully get it, but this book, I get the hype now, you guys. You were all right. I was wrong. From the very first page of this book, I mean, Ferrante comes out swinging. She ups the stakes so much more than she did in the first book, and really set into motion character development that I thought was missing from the first book. This sees our two protagonists, Lenu and Lila, become young women, and they start to deal with really serious stuff: marriage, infidelity, pregnancy, poverty, abuse, and we really see the both of them try to take their futures into their own hands. They have this friendship that there's a lot of push and pull between them. It's heartwarming at times. Sometimes it's really frustrating, but overall it's just such a vivid display of the intricacies of female friendship. It's so layered and complex, and it's not always like sunshine and rainbow best friend vibes, you know? I was really worried going into this that I wasn't going to remember enough from book 1, but luckily for us, we have a character list at the beginning, and that was super helpful. And I think that, I don't know if this is on Ferrante or on the translator, Anne Goldstein, I think, is the translator of this. Yeah, I think she's translated like all of Ferrante's books. I think that enough context is provided within the text of the book where you kind of get your memory jogged, and they explain some of the things that you might have forgotten. This is a lot bigger of a book than I typically read, but it is so perfect to get lost in. I took a page from Literary Iggy's playbook and have decided to make reading one of these books like my summer tradition. So I'll be moving on to the third book in summer of 2025. But I think that they're really perfect for that time of year. I was just like, I remember sitting on my parents' front porch just like glued to the pages. I have a quote from this one as well. It says, "If nothing could save us, not money, not a male body, and not even studying, we might as well destroy everything immediately." Her rage expanded in my breast, a force that was mine and not mine, filling me with the pleasure of losing myself. We're back at it with another essay collection, First Love by Lilly Dancyger. This book, oh my gosh, you guys, I wanted to buy a copy of it for all of my friends for Christmas. I ended up not doing that, but it's the thought that counts, right? This book was such a balm for the soul. It is basically 15 love letters from Lily to the most important women in her life. For me personally, a lot of my very close friendships have recently surpassed a decade, which is really crazy to think about, but I'm so thankful for that. And the experiences that Lily is describing in this book are just so on par with so many things that I've experienced in my friendships throughout the last 10 years. She talks about the all-consuming nature of best friendship whenever you're a teenager and you find that one person that you just connect with so much, and you just, clown to clown communication. She talks about the care that we receive from our friends and that we give to our friends, and how there's nothing else like it in the world, and it's its own form of mothering. And she talks about growing apart from people, growing back together again, which is something that has happened for me, throughout the years as well. She just talks about so many hilarious and sweet memories, and just how unique our view is of our friends. Like, it's such a special bond to have with other women. This was also, though, a look into a lot of experiences that my group of friends hasn't had yet. One essay in particular that really stood out to me was Mutual Mothering, where she is talking about witnessing her friends become mothers, and she's kind of grappling with whether or not she wants to have a child herself. And then that's where she also brings in this idea that we are mothers to our friends, and there's this special kind of bond and way that we take care of each other. She doesn't find a clear answer on whether or not she wants to have kids, which I think is also very relatable. I like that she didn't just like wrap it up in a neat bow of like, oh yeah, then I had a kid. Like I figured out what I wanted to do. Like, it was still very much up in the air for her, and I thought that was very honest. Another essay that I really loved in here was Portraiture, which is a collaboration actually between Lily and her friend Courtney, who's a photographer, one of my besties, also went to school for photography, and we've had many photo shoots together. So that one was especially poignant for me. They kind of had a conversation about just how you can be so yourself with a close friend, and there's a series of photos that were taken to go along with the essay, and I thought that was like such a cool mixture of both of their forms of art. Going back to like being referential, I really liked the references that Lily Dancyger pulled in here. She talks about Sylvia Plath and the movie Heavenly Creatures, and those are two things that I'm familiar with, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And yeah, I mean, this is just like such a heartwarming, feel-good book. Okay guys, we're on to the last two books. Oh my gosh, this is gonna be a pain to edit, but we have what is maybe the biggest literary event of 2024, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Hello. Man, me and Sally Rooney, our relationship just keeps getting better and better, Every time that I have read a book of hers, I've said, oh, this one's my favorite. And then I read another one and I'm like, wait, actually, this one's my favorite. It's happened every single time where I'm like, the bar just keeps getting raised, and this was no exception to that rule. I was like, oh wait, I love this one now, which was actually really surprising to me. Just from the synopsis of this book, I wasn't sure if it was gonna be the Rooney for me. It's been 2 years since I last read one of her novels, and I just wasn't sure if the story here was going to appeal to me. I was worried that maybe I had moved on from her writing style and the stories that she tells, but it was quite the opposite. This is another chunky book, 450 plus pages, and I read it in 6 days, which I think is pretty quick for me personally for a book of this size. The reason why I was kind of apprehensive about the plot of this is because it is about two brothers. Ivan and Peter, they are dealing with the grief of their father's death. And don't worry about the man thing. Oh my god. I was scared that the perspective of the brothers wasn't going to click for me, but in classic Rooney fashion, there's romantic entanglements here. There's a lot of heart-wrenching lines about how complicated life and love are, and she explores class and power dynamics. There's like an age gap relationship here, and just looking at the ways that we move throughout the world and the people that we come into contact with. I really liked the way that she portrayed family relationships here and just how complicated the bond between Peter and Ivan was. I thought that that was very realistic, and there was also, I thought, a lot of layers to the romantic relationships in here. So yeah, I think that Rooney is just so good at capturing like the nuances of each relationship between characters. One of the things that was a huge departure here was the writing style. She alternates between Ivan and Peter's points of view, and whenever she's writing from Peter's perspective, it's this very clipped, fragmentary style that really did throw me off at first. I was like, girl, what is going on here? Why are we talking like this? But I found, for me personally, the more that I progressed throughout the book, the easier it was to understand what she was doing with that. I think that it was a really effective way of kind of expressing Peter's mental state. Ivan's chapters, though, are more along the lines of Sally's previous books. And yeah, I just thought that there was a really great juxtaposition between the two brothers, and I think it characterized them. It showed the ways that they were really different from each other. This is I would say a more mature work from Rooney, but I don't think that it's going to alienate her previous fans. I feel like I saw some people kind of saying like this is going to be the book that kind of sets apart like the true Rooney fans from the not true ones. I think once you get into it, you'll find something to enjoy if you've liked her previous books. This just felt really complex and like fully fleshed out, like a novel with a capital N to me. Just could really get lost into it, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Alrighty, our last book, our last 5-star read is The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Weijun. This book, oh, you guys, I just love a good essay collection, and this is such a good essay collection. This was a really great mix of personal writing about the author's own experience with schizoaffective disorder, which was something that I was not familiar with before reading this book. But she also incorporates a lot of research into the history and the treatment and the perception of the group of mental illnesses that are known as the collected schizophrenias. I've read a few different female authors' accounts of being hospitalized for mental illness, but none of them have been specifically about schizoaffective disorder. And it's a disorder that is really widely mischaracterized and also like very villainized by the media. I thought that this was so educational in a really approachable way. The author talks about so many different aspects of her life and how her mental illness affects those. She talks about her time as a student at Yale and how the university just completely mishandled her situation whenever she had kind of her first like breakdown. She looks at chronic illness and the way that trauma and mental illness kind of all compound and affect people in different ways. And she also talks about her connection to spirituality, which was a really interesting essay in this collection. I really loved her writing style. She was very frank and to the point, and I thought that it made the topic really engaging. She just provided a perspective that is usually quite overlooked and unheard. I feel like I really learned something with this book, and I just felt so in awe of the author's resilience and her poise in the face of such a difficult disorder. There's just something so special to me about an essay collection that kind of strikes that balance between like personal and educational, and this just had me enthralled. Oh my god, you guys, I think I have like 80 minutes of footage that I'm gonna have to edit. That's crazy. But I hope that you guys enjoyed. I hope that this added to your TBR. I mean, these books, you can tell there's a theme here. I obviously have my interests and things that I like to read about specifically, and I think that these books, like looking at them all together, they're just so in conversation with each other. So I feel like if you like one of the books on this list, you'll probably like the others, you know? So yeah, I feel so happy that I got to just sit here and yap about these books. It made me remember how much I loved all of them. Let me know what your favorite reads of 2024 were. I would love for you to write me a little essay in the comments. Give me the review, tell me what I should pick up, and yeah, we can just have a good time talking about our faves. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!